I'm absolutely delighted that Georgia Mills is going to now run this next section for us. So Georgia is the project manager at UCL, working on the Edmund J. Safra Accelerating Clinical Trials for Parkinson's project, which is a multi-arm, multi-stage clinical trial platform.
Thanks, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. So yes, I'm Georgia Mills. I'm the Research Project Manager for EJS-ACT-PD, which we've heard about a little bit already this afternoon. And you might have heard about it before as well. I know Cure Parkinson's have put out updates and newsletters on the website, and so Parkinson's UK. So you might have come across it previously. What I wanted to do today was just give you a bit of an overview and some background to the project, so why it was set up and what our goals are, a little bit of an update on where we're at now, and also focus a lot on all the things that we're trying to do differently. So we've kind of talked a bit today about how trials need to move forward in a way that is innovative, all the different things that we really need to think about and link up on. So I want to focus on a few of those points of what we would like to do differently with this trial. So what is EJS-ACT-PD? So this stands for the Edmund J. Safra Accelerating Clinical Trials in Parkinson's Disease Project, or EJS-ACT-PD for short, although I appreciate that's still a little bit of a mouthful. And so the Edmund J. Safra Foundation funded this project, and it's a very exciting project in which we're aiming to improve how we run clinical trials in Parkinson's disease. So we've got lots of people involved in the project, and we've got expert members from across the whole of the UK, lots of different professionals, neurologists, statisticians, geriatricians, charities, Cure Parkinson's and Parkinson's UK are involved, and of course, people with Parkinson's and their care partners are also involved in the project. So everyone's really come together because they are passionate about advancing and improving how we run clinical trials in Parkinson's disease. And how we want to do this and make improvements is by designing a trial where we can find answers faster. So we really want to speed up how we run trials in Parkinson's and how we get answers about what treatments work and don't work back to the Parkinson's community. And so I'm sure, as you'll all be aware, we obviously don't have a cure for Parkinson's at the moment, and we don't have any treatments that can slow or stop disease progression. So within the trial, we really want to focus on treatments that have the potential to do this. So we're not looking at treatments that might be able to manage symptoms. We want to look at treatments that have the potential to slow or stop Parkinson's disease. And we really want to find the answers about those treatments as fast as we can. So how are we going to do this? So on the screen here is a very rough example of what a typical clinical trial design would look like. And so they're obviously a lot more complex than this, but as a bit of an overview, you start off at the side there with the setup process. So this is where you design the trial, secure all of the funding, get all of your regulatory approval, so your ethical approval, get all of your sites on board, get the sites ready to open. And then when you've got all of that in place, you can open the trial and start recruitment. And in a typical clinical trial design, you would be testing one treatment against one placebo or dummy drug, and you would recruit participants and they'd be allocated either to the treatment or the placebo. You might run the trial for a few years. At the end of the trial, you'll have some time to look at all of your results, see what they say with the analyses, whether it looks like it's effective or not. You report your results. And at the end of that, you probably want to run another trial. So if the treatment has a positive result and it looks like it's effective, you might need to run another trial, which is larger and has more participants. So as Oliver mentioned earlier, the different phases of clinical studies. Or if the result is negative and the trial doesn't seem to be effective, you might want to run another trial with a different treatment to see if that one works instead. At this point, you have to go all the way back to that setup process and start all over. So your clinical trial infrastructure that you set up for this trial has all been dismantled. It's been closed at all of the sites. You have to go back and redesign a new trial, re-get your funding, redo the approvals process, restart over with all of the sites, and then start recruitment again. So in this, say, 5-year time period, you might have answers on one treatment. And that's what we want to change. So what we want to do is run a multi-arm, multi-stage design. So I say we want to do this, we are doing this. We've designed a multi-arm, multi-stage platform trial. And as you can see, it looks a lot more complicated. So we call this a MAMS trial design for short. And you still have that setup process at the start, which is in some cases considerably longer because it's a more complex trial. That's the stage we're in currently with EJS-ACT-PD. We're in the stage of still finalising the design of the trial and sorting out all of our funding and approvals. But this time when you open the trial, instead of just having one treatment to compare against your placebo, you have multiple treatments to compare. So on the board as an example is starting the trial with up to 3 different treatments versus that one placebo. So that's the multi-arm element. And then what you do is, instead of waiting until the end of the trial to do the analysis and see if the treatment is effective or not, you can do earlier tests at what we call a stage analysis. So the time point of these analyses are all predetermined by some very clever statistical calculations that I have nothing to do with, because I can't do any of the statistical side of it, but we have some brilliant people involved who will decide those timeframes to make sure that they're effective timeframes. You will test the treatments and see if they appear to be working or not. If a treatment does appear to be working, you can carry on recruitment until the next stage analysis or until the final analysis to see if it's definitely effective or not, which is the example there with treatment 1. Or if the treatment doesn't seem to be working, you can stop recruitment, you can remove it from the trial, and instead you can replace it with a new treatment. So instead of having to wait till the end or to dismantle all of this trial infrastructure and do a new trial, you keep all the infrastructure in place and just add in a new treatment arm instead. And then you can do the same with those, take them to a stage analysis, test, see if they're working or not. And essentially, if you have all the funding in place, you can keep this going, adding in new treatments until you find one that works. So this has lots of advantages. We can obviously test lots of different treatments all within the same trial. We have less participants on the placebo arm in the overall trial, so a smaller percentage. And so it saves money, and ultimately it saves time. So just a quick slide on why now, because I'm sure you'll all be aware we are obviously at a very critical time point in Parkinson's research. It's the fastest growing neurodegenerative condition in the world. And as Oliver mentioned earlier, there's been lots of advances in research, which means there are lots of potential treatments that are waiting to be tested. And what we really need is a way to speed up their assessment and get the answers that we need. And that's what we planned for this MAMS design trial to do. We've got all of those treatments. We're going to pick the most promising ones, and we're going to run them through the trial and see if they work or not. So the EJS-ACT-PD consortium are designing this. As I mentioned earlier, we've got lots of people involved, I think around 100 members now. I'm not going to go through the whole consortium design, but just to touch on the 6 boxes in the middle, there are 6 working groups for the project, and they're each responsible for a different element of the trial. So our trial design working group are responsible for the overall design of the trial. Our treatment selection working group, Oliver is one of our chairs on that group, are responsible for selecting the most promising treatments for the trial. The outcome measures working group are responsible for selecting the assessments that we use to see if the treatment is effective or not. Our infrastructure working group are responsible for making sure that sites across the UK are able to open and deliver the trial for us. Our funding group, of course, are responsible for securing all of the money that we need to run the trial, but they are also focused on making sure the trial is sustainable over the long term, and we can really keep this going for as long as we need to. And our PPIE working group, so that stands for our Patient and Public Inclusion and Engagement Group, are one of the most, well, probably the most important working group, because that is made up of all of our patient and carer members who are helping us to make sure the trial is acceptable and feasible, and that people with Parkinson's can take part in it and actually want to take part in it. So just on the bottom there, you can see there is some further PPIE input within the trial as well, which I'll touch on a bit more in the next few slides. But just another really important group on here is our communications group. So that's made up of members from all of the working groups, including patient and carer members, and they're responsible for designing the overall communication strategy for the trial before we launch the trial, to make sure we get the word out to everyone and raise awareness, but also during the trial to make sure that participants feel supported whilst they're taking part. So just to touch on our patient and care partner involvement, so we have our PPIE working group, but actually we have 2 to 3 members, patient or care members from that working group who are also part of all of our other 5 working groups. So it means that patient and carers are included in all areas of the project, they're involved in all discussions, all decision making, and their role is really to provide input and feedback on what's acceptable, what's feasible, and make sure that we are keeping patients' best interests in mind with all design decisions and making sure we're designing a trial that is patient focused. And the additional patient and public input we've included. So our PPI members actually came to us and said, on some of the decisions and discussions that we're having, we want to make sure we are feeling like we're representative of the wider Parkinson's population. Obviously, you can't consult everyone, but there were some topics that they wanted to consult a wider group on. And so we set up our wider PPIE network. So working groups within the project will discuss different topics and decide where they need some further PPIE input. Our PPIE working group will take that back to the whole working group to discuss and decide if we need wider input on that. If we do, then we consult our PPIE wider network. I think there's about 40 members in there now. Essentially, they work as a rapid response team. So we might send out a survey or some short answer questions, or a request to be involved, say, in a focus group or whatever method we need to collect that information. They don't have to respond, and it's completely anonymous most of the time if they do, but it just means that we can get that wider input where we need it. We can take all of that feedback back to the working group discussion, and we feel that then we've consulted a wider group to help inform our decisions. And then we also have our community advisory panel. So we did a survey early on in the consortium to look at the demographic breakdown. And we identified that actually we didn't feel we were capturing diverse perspectives within the design of the trial. And as we touched on earlier, EDI is a big challenge in all research. It's something that we really want to try and tackle with this trial. And if we're not involving diverse perspectives in the design, then how do we know that the trial is actually going to be accessible for a diverse population? So we opened recruitment for people with experience of Parkinson's disease or experience of a chronic health condition. And we actually appointed 10 members with a really diverse range of backgrounds and perspectives. We have different racial and ethnic backgrounds included, different geographical locations, different financial backgrounds. And their role is to help provide input on the accessibility of the trial and to help us to engage with different communities and different groups of people with Parkinson's who might not be as well represented in research. And just to really think about that communication strategy and how we can make sure that the trial is available for as many people that want to take part as possible. So a quick update on our progress. So a few of the key points that we have tackled so far. Trial length with regards to how long we'll ask a participant to take a treatment for is 3 years, which I appreciate might seem like a long time, but because we're trying to measure how the disease progresses and any changes in that, it has to be a bit longer than a symptomatic management trial because we want to see if there are changes and if they're long term. We know that we have a recruitment target of 1,600 participants, a very large number, which is why it's so important that that communications group really works on that strategy, and we help to raise awareness and get people excited and involved in the trial, because every single one of those 1,600 participants is really important, and every single one is contributing to us finding the answers that we need about Parkinson's disease. So it is a large number, but we are positive that we will reach the target. We also know that we will want to include 40 sites across the UK, another large number, but we have created a tiered site system so that sites who have less experience in Parkinson's disease research can be supported by sites with more experience, so that they can all take part if they want to. And we're also hoping that this helps to improve the knowledge and experience of Parkinson's disease research delivery across the UK in general, because some of these sites might have never delivered a trial before, and we'll be able to support them to do so. We've decided the first 3 to 4 treatments that we're prioritising, one of course, which is UDCA, which is very exciting. So we'll be launching the trial with 2 treatments initially, but we've lined up 3 to 4 that we want to prioritise for those first 4 arms. And they went through a very rigorous process within Oliver's treatment selection working group, exploring the scientific evidence behind them all, the safety data, also thinking about all of the side effects and the dosage requirements and whether that's acceptable for people with Parkinson's. And we've prioritised those first few arms, which is very exciting. We've also decided what the trial assessments will be. So what we will use to test whether the treatment seems to be working or not, and how we'll deliver the trial. So how we'll ask people to complete those assessments. And we have secured some funding pledges, which is fantastic. We're almost all the way there with our funding, which means the trial will be going ahead, hopefully next year. And that then the next step for our funding group is to think about how we keep the trial going in the future and make sure it's sustainable and long term. So a bit of a pause on an overview of the trial, because we do want your input. So we really would like some input on the trial's name. So I've already talked about the communication strategy and how important that is. So our current long name for the trial, so most trials will have a long name and a shorter name, is the Edmund J. Safra Parkinson's Disease Multi-Arm Multi-Stage Trial Platform. So it's very long. And for people who haven't maybe come across or been involved in research before, it probably doesn't make much sense. So we want to find a short name that's catchy, that's linked to our goal of speeding up trials in Parkinson's. And we would really like the say of people with Parkinson's and care partners and people in the industry of what this name could be. So there's a QR code there that you can scan on your phones. And what that will take you to is a website called menti.com. You can put in any suggestions for the name. It's all anonymous. Anything that you pops into your head or that you think could be a good name. And what we'll do later in the presentation is they'll all pop up on the screen and we can have a little look at those and see what we think. So I'll just give everyone a moment if you would like to scan the QR code. I purposely haven't gone into too much detail on the project at this point because I think it's helpful to have a name that is linked to the trial, but for people who don't know much about the trial, it still resonates. And so any names we can, think about, but thinking about things to do with the multiple arm aspect could be helpful, or the fact that we really want to focus on speeding up how we do things in Parkinson's. So I'll just give everyone a second if they want to scan that. I think most phones are down. Oops, one still. Okay. So back to the trial, and I haven't focused, as I said, too much on what the trial will look like. I really wanted to focus a bit more on some of the exciting aspects about the trial and some of the things that we want to do differently. So when we're thinking about what do we want to achieve, of course, we want to achieve a successful multi-arm, multi-stage platform trial for Parkinson's disease that assesses potentially disease-modifying therapies. But this trial is really an opportunity for us to do things differently, to be innovative, and to really take advantage of that opportunity to change how we run trials in Parkinson's disease, because there's lots of things that we can improve upon. So we really want to be innovative. We want to think about new ways that we can measure progression and new ways that we can deliver trials in Parkinson's. We want to be inclusive and accessible. So as we discussed earlier, this is really a huge challenge in research in general, not just Parkinson's disease research. So for us, really thinking and being proactive about how we can engage with groups that aren't well represented in research, how we can identify the barriers and overcome them, very early on from this initial design point is really important. And we want to make sure the trial is accessible. 1,600 participants is a lot of people. So we want to make sure that it's easy for people to take part if they want to. And also we really want the trial to be patient-centered. So we're designing the trial alongside our patient and carer members who have been just absolutely fantastic. The level of input and commitment has really been amazing. And we have lots of the members here today, which is fantastic. But we want to make sure the trial is acceptable and it's meaningful for people with Parkinson's. We want the results to mean something. And we want to make sure that the trial's a positive experience for people, because there's no point designing a trial that no one wants to take part in. So that's a really important aspect for us as well. So thinking about how we have been innovative, when thinking about the delivery, we have designed the trial to be a hybrid delivery. And what we mean by that is partly in person and partly online. So actually after that first appointment with the screening visit, which is in person, and that's where we do all of the safety checks and make sure that you actually can take part in the trial. Afterwards, if a participant wants to, they can take part in the trial completely remotely, so fully from home. And the way that we're enabling this to happen is that we will have an online trial database where you will submit all of your answers for the assessments. And if you need to do some of the assessments with a member of staff, they can be done on video call or telephone. And we will also be doing direct-to-patient distribution of the medication. So any trial medication will actually be posted to patients. So they can receive this at home. They don't have to travel in every few months to collect it. So this will reduce travel, which we hope will make it easier for anyone who might live far away from their local centre or might have difficulty travelling or mobility issues. And then in turn, hopefully increase accessibility. So the flexibility of this, we hope, will make the trial much less of a burden to take part in. With the online database, it means that the assessments can be done in your own time. They can be split up if they need to. So hopefully just making it, as easy as possible to take part in. There are options if you would rather have more in-person visits as well. We know that some people prefer this. There was very mixed feedback from our PPI working group on what they prefer, which is fine, which is why we've tried to make the delivery as flexible as possible so that it suits everyone's needs. And then we also want to be innovative about how we measure progression. So we are focusing on patient-reported assessments mostly. So this is having the participants in the trial tell us what they think has changed or how their symptoms might be different rather than the clinician telling them. And as we discussed briefly earlier as well, including digital devices. So we hope that the platform will be a really great opportunity to assess some of these digital devices. We've prioritised, I think, 3 currently that we're considering including in the trial. So some of them are wearables, some of them are apps on your phone. And as Oliver discussed earlier, they are really, really amazing at collecting data, some of them very passively, and collecting lots more data than we can capture in an assessment. So we want to include digital devices, and we're also looking at different imaging techniques we can include and different biomarkers that we want to look at. And again, with that large number of participants, it's lots of people, it's lots of data, so we can really find some beneficial evidence within all of this from a really large and hopefully diverse sample of people with Parkinson's. And also the flexible design. So a MAMS design in itself, I would say, is fairly innovative. It's been done in a few other disease areas very successfully. And we thought, why not Parkinson's? There's lots of really great benefits to it. We discussed them earlier, but the flexible design is a really big advantage. We can add new treatments, not just when treatments prove to be ineffective, but we can add new treatments even if all of them are doing well. And we're hoping to add new treatments approximately every 12 months. So we get a really high number of treatments tested and assessed through this platform. It's also adaptable. So different drugs have different dose amounts or might be administered differently. They might not all be tablets. The design is flexible that we can account for that. So UDCA, as we discussed earlier, it has a larger number of tablets you need to take a day than some other treatments, but the trial can adapt around that so that we can include the most promising treatments regardless of how they're taken or how they're administered. And it also means we can update standard of care as we go. And I suppose you can do this with any trial, but we're hoping that within the drugs we test, we can assess them once they show to be effective, hopefully, and they're licensed for use, they become standard of care, and everyone in the trial standard of care will be updated alongside the testing of new promising treatments. So that flexible design hopefully will make sure that we get lots of different answers for lots of different treatments in a much shorter time frame. And inclusivity. So this is really, really important, and it's something we are trying very hard to target. So it's so important that research includes diverse participant populations and populations that are representative of the wider participant group. So we know that Parkinson's affects everyone, it doesn't discriminate, and we're really keen to design a trial that's able to target groups who aren't often included in research. And this gives us lots of great benefits. It will help to increase our understanding of how Parkinson's disease presents, how it progresses, and how it responds to treatment, and whether this varies between groups. There's also specific factors that might only be found in certain populations, and this will help us to identify those, so different genetic variations, for example. But I think potentially most importantly is that research should be accessible for all. There's lots of benefits involved with taking part in a research trial. Studies have shown that it can improve well-being even if you're on placebo. And so it's really important that everyone has the opportunity to take part if they want to, that everyone is contacted about the trials and made aware of them, and that it's easy for them to take part. So we're really focusing on identifying the barriers to participation and how we can overcome them, and how we can engage with different groups. And our community advisory panel is really fantastic for input and advice on that as well. So they're helping us to think about how we can make use of community champions, for example, how we might need to amend some of our communication materials or methods, and using a mixed methods approach of how we reach out to people. So it's a work in progress, but our EDI strategy hopefully will help us to recruit a population that is representative. Some of the things I've kind of just touched on, but some of the things that we want to do to increase inclusivity is increase accessibility to the trial, so overcoming those barriers, but also making sure we have broad eligibility criteria where we can. So we're trying to make it that as many people who want to take part in the trial can take part in the trial, of course, while still making sure the trial is doing what it needs to and testing what it needs to. But so we've broadened out that eligibility criteria somewhat from other studies. We've removed an upper age limit, and instead trying to make it as open as we can. We want to include the wider Parkinson's population, so those EDI strategies that I just was talking about. So we really want to target different communities. We're working with Cure Parkinson's and Parkinson's UK to get involved with all of their work on this as well, and how we can attend different community events and run those ourselves in the trial. And we want to involve more people with Parkinson's in research. So there's lots of people with Parkinson's who've never taken part in a trial or never been involved, in this early stage as well, or had their say or had any input in the trial. So our communications group and our PPA working group are really helping us to create informed communication strategies and messaging that we hope we can reach a wider Parkinson's population with, and that we can make very understandable for people who might not have come across any kind of research terms or research involvement before, and really get the word out so that anyone who wants to take part knows about the trial and is able to. And I just wanted to touch on that last point about making the trial as acceptable and meaningful as possible. So this is only possible with our PPIE working group and input, and the PPI working group have had a massive impact on the trial design. And I just wanted to touch on not even all of the points that they've contributed to, but just some of the ways that their input has actually shaped the trial and our decisions. And how we hope that that will make the trial more appealing for people to take part in. So when thinking about the design and delivery, we're using on assessments. So that means that you won't have to come off your medication to complete any of the assessments in the trial, which, we had feedback that actually that's a big challenge and something that can put people off taking part. A maximum of 3 years of treatment, which again, as I mentioned earlier, I know isn't particularly short as a disease modifying therapy trial. We need it to be a bit longer, but we listened to our PPI working group who helped us decide, what a maximum length would be that they would be willing to take part in a trial for. All of our recruitment strategies that we're thinking about, so how we reach out to people and how we make sure that that method is appropriate and effective. And the consent process, so helping us with all of the wording around the consent and the information that we give to participants about taking part in the trial to make sure that's understandable, hopefully as simple as possible, and also gives all the information that we need to. Outcome measures, so we will be focusing within our primary outcome measure, so where we're testing effectiveness, on non-motor symptoms. So Oliver mentioned the MDS-UPDRS earlier in part 3, which is much more focused on motor symptoms. And actually our PPI working group discussed with us that they felt like the non-motor symptoms were the things that impacted them more on their daily life, and it was more meaningful for them to see a change in those. So that's going to be included as part of our primary outcome measure. A maximum time length of the outcome measures that we ask people to complete. I can't remember how long this is actually anymore, but we tried to make it as short as possible, and we asked for feedback from PPI working group on what the maximum time length they would be happy to complete assessments for was, and included that in our decision. And of course, with it being partly remote, it means that they can split those up and you can complete them, in your own time in a flexible way as well. And patient-friendly devices. So there's lots of digital devices out there. We have prioritised some of the devices based on their scientific input, and we actually have a PPA workshop coming up where we will be having a look at these together and thinking about any challenges that participants might face if we ask them to use these in the trial, and just making sure that we can make those as acceptable and user-friendly as possible. Communication strategy, so again, the recruitment strategies and all of the materials that we want to produce for the trial, and also thinking about the continued engagement. So, you know, as I've mentioned, some participants might be taking part in the trial almost completely from home, and we want to make sure that they still feel supported throughout their time in the trial. They don't feel left behind or forgotten about. So putting in some kind of continued engagement processes where we are reaching out to people, or we are hosting events that people can come along to and have updates on the trial or ask questions, and also opportunities for feedback. So this was flagged as something that was really important for our PPAE members, was being able to offer feedback on their experience in the trial throughout the trial, not just at the end. And this will mean that people can give us feedback whilst the trial's still running, which we can act on and, you know, proactively improve the trial whilst they're still members and participants in the study. And treatment selection. So PPA working group have been very helpful with thinking about acceptable dosage and size, how tolerable the side effects are. They've produced lay summaries of the treatment so we can communicate about them effectively with participants, and more recently helping us with decisions around the amount of medication you might receive in the trial, and how you'd be expected to store it. So there's been just a massive amount of impact from the PPIE working group, and we hope that this means that the trial will be much more appealing for people to take part in, and it will be a positive experience for everyone who does participate. So next steps, we are finalising the full trial protocol currently, and that is the document that kind of outlines every single process involved in the trial. We are in the process of confirming all of the funding, and we still need to then initiate all of the contracts. We're confirming the drug supplies and manufacturing. We need to go through our ethical approval, which we hope to do early next year. We plan to continue the engagement process with sites and with people with Parkinson's, to start raising that awareness early and making sure everyone knows when we'll be opening and what the plans will be. We need to get all of the trial team in place when we're actually running the trial. We need to select our sites and prepare them for opening. And then hopefully we will be open to recruitment by the end of 2024. And now is the slide where we should have any suggestions. Oh, wow, fantastic. Lots of trials. Lots of names. And some really great names. So the difficulty we've had with names is that other trials have already stolen some of the good ones. So Octopus, which is a fantastic name because it has lots of legs/arms, is actually a trial that's being run for multiple sclerosis. So that one's already taken. Caterpillar, I think, is also already taken, although I like that name. Speedy Parky, Action for PD, Highway is one that's come up. There's some really brilliant names about speeding things up. Rapid PD. So there's lots of great names there for us to take back to our comms team. We actually do have a survey that's up currently where there's a list of the current short names that people can provide feedback on, and there's also an option for people to submit more suggestions. So I think that's on the handout. There's a QR code for that. So if you think of any more, you can send those through, or if you'd like to have any feedback on the current shortlist, you can do so on that survey, and I'm sure we'll be updating it with any of these names soon as well. So, oh, I think there is one more slide, but I can't get to it. Oh. Yes, that's it. Thank you. So if you do want to get involved, there's lots of ways. It might just be keeping updated with our progress, which you can do on social media. We've got Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Or if you wanted to be involved and have your say, then you can join our PPIE wider network. We are always recruiting to the wider network. On our website there, we post updates, but there's also a page called Get Involved. And there's an application form for the wider network there. And it's not really an application form, it's really just your contact details, because there's no requirements to being involved apart from having experience with Parkinson's. And what that means is we'll add you to our contact list, and any future requests we send out for input will come to you. And like I said, it's completely optional if you wanted to respond to them or not, but it does mean that you'll have the opportunity to have your say about some of the decisions in the trial.